Another thing that I've just thought that's worth mentioning is this. So when you are studying psychedelics, and anyone will back this up and support this evidence, such as like Dennis McKenna or Jonathan Ott or Graham Hancock or anyone like that. So when you are investigating the psychedelics, and when you are sort of studying the effects of them and understanding that, when you get into the sort of very, very deep experiences, when you can actually have fully out-of-body experiences or kind of in-between ones at different stages, but there is this sort of the constructs of the visual field, which are inherently biological function and aspect of part of being human, which are formed when you're in the womb, really, and then come into formation and calibration with your environment and surroundings, and the caricatures, the familiars who are your parents and peers, and the familiar objects and surroundings, your life, really, and all the objects that give that life power, trees, places, might even be the presence of the ancestors, your actual ancestors, or buildings, anything that's got knowledge or anything to learn, or anything there from any other education system that has been put in place, what other people want you to learn from their perspective or point of view, then, and all the things that you give you power or feeling or emotion, or don't, especially if they've been taken away from you or robbed or been attacked, and then you're depowered, the visual aspect of it, when, a lot of the things, when people talk about elves and fairies and things like that, there are lots of in-between experiences, and you can even get hallucinations as well. And then you've got dreaming. There are so many different levels, like dreaming, hallucinations, or actual visual sprites, or pixels, or whatever you want to call them. There is a definition of the experience which presents itself. Either some call it like the mother spirits. It's like being back inside the mother again, actually inside, basically, literally, your biological womb. And there is like a presence which you could correlate to, like the experience of being connected to your mother by the umbilical cord. But one of the manifestations or interpretations of this experience, when you have it in adult life or in teenage life, when you revisit it, not actually when you are born, when you revisit it again, one of the interpretations is the actual dragon, mainly because the patterns that you observe are very similar to scales, very similar to scales that you see on dragons, and also it correlates with the patterns and shapes of the chakra. You can see many of these patterns in nature on many different plants and seed pods and cones and things like that anyway. But one of the motifs is the dragon. And it is almost like a beast, a creature. I mean, we are creatures, we are beasts. The shape changer, it's like a shape changing form. And that actually is very similar to when the BBC used to put the static in between programmes. It's just how the way television works, what it's like when there's no signal, or when a signal breaks down to its raw essence. Maybe they could have displayed it in waves or different things, and that was just something they programmed it and chose to have. But it wasn't usually in colour, it was black and white, wasn't it? Now, when you actually do stare at these pixels and patterns, you can get characters coming out of them and forming. Almost, it works in the same way as clouds, really. When a cloud passes, you look at it, I know there's a certain shape or a certain face, and then it changes. It essentially is like that, but obviously, when you've got so much more minute detail to work with, then you can have a lot more different depth of what actually ends up being presented and coming out of it. You can have various different, faces, shapes, scenarios, or whatever. But what I want to compare this to, right, is this. All that being said, when we talk about the video that Anonymous did the other day, which is a very, 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 very important video, probably the best video that Anonymous has ever done, even though it's sort of like kind of just building on from the one that Sorrel Lamar Finance did about BlackRock. And actually, Extinction Rebellion already knew about BlackRock, but I didn't really know about BlackRock. Anonymous is kind of like sort of taking it in towards the ancestors and the long-established families, which is like very, very interesting, because that's kind of where I've been going with my investigation work. But in terms of this subject, what I've been talking about, psychedelics and ancestry and heritage and ancient sites and things like that, places of power. Now, the thing is that when you are engaged with any person or anything, or even the environment, or even ideas, right, what you learn from the psychedelic experiences to do with, when you are in communion with your own inherent intelligence and your own inherent biological memory and your own ideas, right? And when those ideas are at play, which is if uninterrupted, you get into these experiences and you can engage with them, right? You can almost be directed by your own ideas and intellect and intelligence, right? If, for example, it's not influenced by anyone else, because, if a police helicopter flies over and sirens, then, it can affect your experience and intimidate or scare you while you're having one of those experiences. If they know that you're doing it at the time, that can influence it. I just said that because I thought it was appropriate to throw that in there. But, so, with the gestures, you can often have competing ideas yourself, like one idea is a good idea, but then another idea conjures itself up and it's like conflicting with, I might do that, or no, but then, the whole interplay of ideas. If you have a great idea, then you check it's good and you think about everything about it to support that mentally, cognitively, rationally, to establish it's a good idea and why. These ideas can combine and merge, but then you can have conflicting ideas, and almost the ideas themselves might sometimes fight it out for which is the best idea, and then so not to do that. So you've got this competitiveness, this competing spirit within the actual establishment of the ideas, and even if without any influence, even without anyone else, even the ideas themselves, it's almost like compete, and then the one that the idea you're going to do, the best idea, then you end up doing that. But obviously, if influenced though, now when you bring other persons or other people into that dynamic, if you want to do something and everyone goes along with it, then you end up doing it. And if you don't, you don't. It's like, oh, what should we do today on a Saturday? Now, if you want to go to the beach and then two other friends don't, but you're the one who's got transport, then usually they'll end up doing with the person who won't want to go, right? Because they can't get there otherwise, or they might just go off by themselves, right? Unless another person has an idea and then they do that, right? Now, you get this kind of effect. Now, I wanted what is the reason I chose this example of these patterns? Is because I want you now to understand how important the image is. The image, I'll say it again, the image. My image is important, my image, right? The image transmits. The television has this frequency of bits, and then it comes together and forms the image, the ideal, the idea, which you perception, right? Transmits, broadcasts, casts the idea, right? Now, and you receive it, it transmits. Now, you have these images all around you. Your parents are familiars in your world, but they are an image, but they are a spirit and a soul and a person. This is to do with religion and Christianity as well, to do with what a soul is and what a spirit is. But then we just have the images, which are, for example, a picture or a poster or a postcard, right? Now, in this world currently that we're living in the year 2022, when I'm recording this, we have got these images now placed everywhere. On the streets, at the gas station, down the road, pictures, images, and the ability to place and position those images, and the influence that the ideal and the idea strategically behind those ideas puts into us to compete with our ideals and our ideas and try to win over the idea and be the winning idea, right? Now, you might think, oh, well, there's loads of different companies out there and they're all trying to get you to buy the products and do this or that. Well, what we find from Anonymous's video from the other day is that all the companies, as it turns out, end up all being owned and operated by the same companies and shareholders, and then the smaller companies we find out are owned by the bigger companies and so forth, until we get down to this actual core people who are, as Anonymous claims, he says that they're well and long established families and persons. So if that's the case, that means that they have influence and decision-making powers, the veins, so to say, stretching all the way out to the individual and smaller advertising outlets and the newspapers as well. So their actual casting ability is not limited to the television shows and channels. They fund through advertisements and own through shares. And not only the advertising boards, the adverts, they can cast an image. Now, with that power, and Anonymous is saying that they pretty much own everything, confirming it. What Sorrel Lamar Finance said that as well in her video, and they own everything, right? You need to understand this, right? If you yourself start a company, right, and have an idea, and you go out to do it, and even if you post it on the internet or do anything, even on Facebook, right? Facebook has places where people can put images and post things and people can pop adverts up, right? Now, you have the right to try and start a business or do an idea. Now, if someone doesn't like it or doesn't want it to succeed, they will an idea they will send out to counteract it, right? To compete, a competing idea or a competing image. Like if your visual image is conjuring up an image of the Liberal Democrats defeating the Tory party, then obviously an image will appear through those methods, means, mediums and avenues, you know, the imagery. If people, for a message or image that really is contradictory to that, or really doesn't think that's a good idea, or make you think it's not a good idea. For example, particularly if you want to get rid of speed cameras, and if you don't want any more speed cameras to be there because you don't like them, and if you don't think you need them, someone might want there to be them because they might be making a lot of money out of them, and they might be benefiting from there. So the idea, what would be the competing idea against, oh, well, I've got an idea, let's not have speed cameras anymore. The idea against that would be, oh no, we definitely need them, and we need more of them, and it's not a good idea to get rid of them. Now, that only occurs when you have more accidents, particularly serious ones. Now, this is when we not only are looking at advertising and billboards, we're looking at event horizon, events and occurrences happening, right? Which might make people think opposite of what we're wanting them to think. Now, this is when we get into, can we prove that someone arranged and did it? Well, we can't with a lot of the incidents because witnesses and evidence and people, we don't know whether it's staged actors and how if they can control it without being identified, they're not identifiable. They might have superior technology, superior machines, control of vehicles, control of radios, what is said on a screen or even commented on a video, you know, even control of aircraft lines and schedules and buses, timetable boards. That is when we're getting, you know, really complicated, and there are a lot of people there who can understand how that could be done. But let's go down to the basic thing. Let's go back. Let's not talk about incidents and events. Let's just talk about the advertising boards, because that's a little bit more concrete. You know, there are advertising companies, there are images on there, and there are people who own them and have decisions in it and influence it. And as it turns out, from Anonymous's video, it turns out, it makes it very, very, very clear that it is a certain and now identifiable group of people who are calling the shots on that. So if you do a company and they're not keen on that being successful, it's quite easy for them to send out through their networks competing images and messages where you might have competing ideas and people might not start thinking that's a good idea what you're doing. It's a lot of power to have that if they pretty much own everything, which means the odds and chances of you being successful, if they don't want you to be, are very small, next to nothing. Now, is that even really a fair chance? I do not think so. I don't think it is. Now, the other thing is that with the ideas and the avenues and means they've got of effect, you know, it really is down to what your capacity is to do things. And if someone is doing something against you, then you're not going to be successful. Now, look at the TV, for example, Coronation Street. It means something. It's a TV show in Manchester, Greater Manchester, but the name of it means something. You know, it's coronation, right? Even though it's a street, working class street, it's about coronation and royalty. But it's associated with the shows about the working class. So the whole point of it, you can interpret it. There's interpretation inside your mind, internal interpretation to interpret. That's about reading and understanding messages. Every message sent and every picture shown, you interpret it, right? it means something, and it persuades and affects other persons. So, interpretation. Now, the thing with art and imagery is that it's creative. Now, for words and letters to know what they mean and what they say to interpret them, even poetically in poetry, you need a dictionary. The dictionary tells you what the words mean. Up, down, left, right. We know what all that means. But when it's just free-form pictures and a few words, there are not so many official interpretations unless you start going into art history. And then you can start reading more creatively. Now, the only thing when you get into the police and policing, when you're interpreting something, is that sometimes things are open for interpretation. It's harder to prove that someone meant this or meant that through an image, because it's not straight, it's not straightforward. It might even be catch-22 or, double meaning or triple meaning, or, it is complicated. But if an interpretation can be gained through it and it is evident. Now, this is when you get into arguments, because different people have different creative ideas and different understanding capacity for what something means. Now, this is when it would be difficult in a court to say, I started a business and it stood for this or meant that, and other people in other businesses attacked it and they used in their adverts competing ideas, and they put it into everyone's minds to not support my company. Now, if they literally wrote it out, do not support this company, you get into things like slander, this and that. But now, through the power of creativity, it can be less obvious and more difficult to prove, even though it has an effect. So it's one part of it's proving the interpretation. But once you've got an established, identifiable network in place, at least you can say these people have got the capacity and network and influence to do that. So they have the capacity, they are facilitated and in a position to do it. If they're capacitated and if they're in a position to do it, then you say, well, would they and have they been? Well, then you've got to read the interpretations and see if they have or not. It's a lot easier to know that, it's coming, and then when you say, well, these people have, because they heard everything, so anything that comes through it is linked to them, and they're essentially in charge of, then what you're doing then is consolidating the case that there really is one singular cause behind it, So this is what I'm talking about. And this is now when we're getting on to other things that are happening, not just when you say, well, all the businesses, well, it's all of them. So that means that a newcomer in the business industry is competing against all of the other companies. And if none of them like what this new company's doing, it would be difficult for it to take off. It's almost like getting a seed of a plant that grows in Africa and then planting it in England, and it likely won't grow. And you can't say, oh, is this soil being racist against this seed? Because the fact is the temperature is not high enough. And if the soil is not got the right nutrients in it, if it needs to be acid when it's alkaline, it won't work. Now, you can complain all you want, and you can take some of your own soil there and you can put it in a greenhouse and then it will grow. But the fact is, it won't if you don't help it, protect it or nurture it, And it could be the same for businesses or anyone. Now, what happens if it's not a business we're talking about and somebody ain't starting a new business and it's not a business in question? What if it's individuals? What happens if it is people of a certain race? Or what happens if it's people of a certain sex? Or what happens if it's people of a certain name or specific name or names, like O'Neill, O'Donnell, O'Connor, and what happens if they've been branded naughty people because they've got a naught in front of their name, Or what happens if, Then you've got Graham Norton. Oh, he's got a Norton on that. He must be naughty. But then there's a Norton Firewall. Yeah, they won't be getting the business to go very far, will they? And then when there's been an IRA fight and everyone thinks Northern Ireland's dodgy and dangerous, and nobody goes on there on holiday and looks at the ancient sites because it's off limits. This is it. Now, I don't know what these... Well, we don't know exactly who the names are of these people, do we? I don't know if it's Emma Arbuthnot, the head magistrate of all of the realm of England and all the other small magistrates Scots around England. We don't know if it's her. If it is, then she is in big trouble. Big trouble with a capital B. If she owns part of everything, then, and has profit-related business interest in it, then she is in the big trouble. Big trouble. Because how can she sit in here any cases when financial gains may be involved for her personally? And that includes any councillors making decisions in chambers as well. Particularly if they're on any political party affiliations, and commissioning roads to be built and made by certain companies like Care when they've got shares or their party's got shares in Care and their peers are on that party. We've got serious trouble. Now, what if in any court, in any case, in any chamber, in any council, you want to take it to the top? What is the top now? It's not even the House of Lords, it's the Supreme Court. So that's the final station. Now, if those Supreme Court judges have got shares in these companies or are involved in those companies and they are going to be at a loss in finance, depending on the outcome of certain cases, then we have a very, very, very big problem. A seriously big problem, because that means that in the court that was put in charge, not the House of Lords, with the supposed abolishment of the Appealate Jurisdiction Act, which cannot be abolished anyway because it's only procedural rules and not the right to bring a case to Parliament, we have got a serious, serious problem. Because we've got a bunch of potato heads. Because they are then criminals and are not fit for position or purpose. So who is going to judge them when they can't judge a case because there might be a profitable loss from it, or their peers or party? We're in big trouble. So I'm not surprised that Anonymous says that that information is currently off limits, that we can't find out who it is. So I'm very interested now, and we'll see. We'll see what happens. Stay tuned.